Okay, I want to bring on Jake Crain. He's the host of the Jboy Show. You can get the podcast, watch it live on our YouTube channel. So months and months ago, actually a year ago, when I started creating the volume, I said I wanted a Southern voice, somebody who really knew his stuff, was dialed in. I looked for a year. And then somebody tipped me off to Jake Crain on the Jboy Show. And not only am I glad that we brought him in, but he is the most passionate, driven, aspirational, connected voice in the South in college football. And we are just over our skis how he's performed in our first college football season together. So, Jake, I'm going to start with a story. Years ago, when I moved to Manhattan Beach, California, there's a lot of surfing here. Mm-hmm. And on Saturdays, like you, I work all days of the week, actually. So on Saturday mornings, I'd go get a big coffee, Pete's Coffee, and I'd go down to the pier and watch surfers. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And, I'd go by myself sometimes, put the dog in the car and just go sit and watch it for 45 minutes to an hour. And I made the observation one time to a friend. I said, I've learned something from those surfers. It's not about the number of waves you can catch. It's about catching the right wave. And when you sat and watched the surfers for an hour, you'd very quickly figure out who are just guys and who are the really long-time surfers by the pier who get up on the board in 1 second, they're flying around. And I said, those guys took the fewest waves. Much more discretion, much pickier. Because when you get the right wave does the work for you. If you don't get the right wave, you got to do work. And so my takeaway on Lincoln Riley is that if you want to get into the playoff, the Pac-12 is the right wave for him. I'd rather battle Oregon than LSU and Georgia and Bama. And by the way, even throw in Texas. These days, Kentucky, Florida, Ole Miss, Lane Kiffin. That I don't see it as a weakness. I think he looked at it and went, my administration, I was happy in the Big 12. I fit the Big 12. I grew up in the Big 12. You didn't tell me we were going to the SEC. It'll always be Saban's conference. And Nick, by the way, he not retiring anytime soon. Historically, it's a defensive conference first. I think Alabama's very much on the up and up, but there's some bags being handed out at the people chasing Alabama. I think that's kind of known in the sport. Mm-hmm. And I think Lincoln Riley said, hell, I got to get through Utah. I got to get through Oregon. Right now, Washington's teetering. I would argue Stanford and Cal are kind of a mess. So that's just the way I view it, is Lincoln saying, hey, this sport's about getting into the playoff. It's just an easier route to the playoff. I mean, Colorado West, Jake, Oregon's the only school financially that can compete with USC.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and number one, Colin, I just want to echo what you said earlier. I appreciate it, man. We've been really excited joining you. I feel like I got caught up to the bigs. I got in the box and just guessed fastball, and it turned out I got one right down the middle. But again, what I talked about today on the show is there's two trains of thoughts in this, and I think there's different types of people. And especially coaches. We all know the egos that are in this business, from the coaches through the staff, even to the players. You have the guys in one hand, like the Brian Harsons, that will leave the West Coast, that want to see at the end of the day, can they compete against the best, and how do they stack up? Because I always make the argument, people say, oh, well, this one-off bowl game against this SEC team, this team competed, this other team didn't compete. But you have those guys that can't lay their head down on the pillow when it's said and done. When you're 85 years old and you're wrinkled and you're sick and you're sitting there telling all your great grandkids the stories, they want to be able to look in the mirror and say, you know what? I went toe-to-toe with Nick Saban because I had to know. I went toe-to-toe with Kirby Smart because I had to know. Then you have another train of thought of guys like you were talking about that are like, what is the easiest path for me to have stability, security, and success? And I think when you look at both sides, there's logical, rational explanations for taking each. But I think it really depends on the ego and the type person that you have. And that doesn't just stay in college football. That's in business. You have guys that when they, they're salesmen, they want to go against the best salesman. I want to see at the end of the day, I made this decision with my life. How do I stack up against the best? Because I could not know. And I don't think Lincoln's wrong for making the decision. I mean, you look at some of the contract details that are starting to bleed out. You start talking about that type of money. But when I look at having a situation where your team at Oklahoma is going to the SEC, you're getting smoke from LSU, got an offer from LSU. Had that vindicated today by Mike Scarborough from Tiger Bait. At the end of the day, it does look like you were ducking the SEC, but that doesn't mean you're dumb. That doesn't mean you're weak. That doesn't mean you're not smart. You're just trying to go about it a different way. You think you can have security, stability, and success out there. You made the point. What, are you worried about Oregon with Cristobal? Yeah, they got a blank check for him. Utah, Kyle Whittingham, always got to worry about them, especially on special teams. Shout out to the special teams. But in the SEC, Ole Miss, Arkansas with Sam Pittman, A&M with Jimbo Fisher, who's starting to catch Bama and Georgia in recruiting. I just think it's two different, archetypes of people. And I think it's a good fit for Lincoln. I don't think it's a bad fit because USC is a sleeping giant, just like there's some other sleeping giants that are starting to wake up a little bit. Michigan this past week. At the end of the day, though, Colin, I'm the type guy, and if I'm an LSU fan or a fan of the school that's going to, I want a guy that wants to know. Good, bad, or indifferent. I'm 85 years old. I can look in the mirror. I either, succeeded or I failed, but I'd rather say woe than go. And that's just kind of where I stand on it.
Yeah, I mean, when I left ESPN to Fox, I didn't feel it was a weakness. I felt ESPN was highly political, and it was easy, regardless of how talented you were, to get lost in the politics if you didn't play the game. So I was a West Coast guy that went to Connecticut. And it's just a labyrinth of politics and who you know and what bosses like you. I have flourished coming back west. And the reality is, I think Lincoln, this is what I've heard. What USC sold him on was this. It's Nick Saban's conference. Oklahoma is not born of the SEC. You were in the Southwestern Conference, but you will never be Alabama as a brand in the South. You'll never be the State School of Florida. You'll never be Baton Rouge. Oklahoma feels as much Texas and Southwest America as it does Louisiana. You'll never, ever have – the South is about tradition. Herschel Walker, Bear Bryant is still discussed in the South. The West is all about tomorrow. The West is all about, LA is all about creating, marketing stars and superstars. And what USC said is, you're not going to go into the South and recreate the South. You're never going to be Southern. You're never going to be bigger than Saban or Alabama. You're never going to matter in the South as much as Georgia. Southerners are about tradition. West Coast people have all moved from somewhere. They'll embrace the progressive new offensive coach. Everybody, LA, 42% of the people or 48% aren't from California. Everybody's a visitor. So come to the state where we make superstars out of gifted visitors. And that was the sales pitch to them, is that the SEC is better than us, but it's tradition and the way it's sensibility. You could win 6 out of 10 conference championships. You're still not Southern. You're still never going to be bigger than Alabama. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, you'll never be as big probably as Auburn in terms of how SEC fans view the conference. You'll always be an outsider. Whereas the Pac-12 has always welcomed outsiders. They wanted Texas in this conference 8 years ago. Pac-12 was dying to get Mac Brown into the conference. So I'm not necessarily defending Lincoln. What I'm saying is the SEC, the statement's always been it matters more here. And I think that's true. I think it's more embedded. It's more rooted in history. I mean, you turn on Southern radio. Now, you're not this way, but most Southern talk show hosts that do college football, you can't go a week without mentioning Bear Bryant. He will end up on the show. Nobody has ever, since I've been doing this show, called up and mentioned Terry Donahue or Mike Bellotti. We just don't view the world that way. We're a windshield conference. Our offenses are more, we've put a lot of coaches in the NFL. So I guess my takeaway is Lincoln fits the West. Cliff Kingsbury actually fits the West better than he fits the South. Does that make any sense?
No, it does. When I look at it, when I think of USC and being in the South my whole life, I don't think of USC as some, little brother out West. I remember Pete Carroll. I remember, 2004 watching the team that they had when Auburn went undefeated in the SEC, and Pete Carroll's got Dominique Byrd and Matt Leinart and Reggie Bush and all these guys out there. And he was a star. My question for Lincoln is, and I get it. I get it 100%. There's a vacuum out there to be filled. There is. I mean, Oregon is Oregon, and Mario Cristobal and Nike and all that's great. But there's really nobody in California right now that's taken the college football mantle and said, all right, turn me into a star. And then the next step is the NFL. Deep in my mind, I wonder if this was a move to get him to a place in a more NFL market, to get him not more exposure, because you get a ton of exposure in the SEC with Oklahoma going in, but it's pretty easy to take that next step from USC to the NFL as well when you're out there doing your thing. And I get that. But to me, when you look at fit and his family situation and security, stability, success, what I mentioned earlier, but to me, you're competitive. I'm competitive. Well, you got to be competitive to survive in here, at least in a certain way. In the coaching world, as well as I do, it's a very small world. And I just think what Lincoln Riley said was, and kind of like what you're saying is, I can go out to USC, and if I win the conference 3 out of 4 years, I'm going to be treated as great as gold. You do it at LSU. Ed Orgeron gets fired two years after winning a national championship.
So did Gene Chizik.
That's exactly right. But it's just, what race do you want to be in, the rat race? Which one do you want? Do you want the one that you're at the highest level? You're in the best division, which depending on what they do with Oklahoma and Texas, do they have divisions, pods, whatever? I just think Lincoln made a very safe decision. He can go out there. They've struggled. Clay Helton was not a media darling. It's not like Lincoln was, and he needs to work on cooking his brisket, but I think you can get away with that out there a lot more than you can in the South. Maybe that was one of the reasons. But, when I look at the fit overall, I think Lincoln will have success. I think his offense will translate. You're going to get a great play action game off the run. He's not just a guy that wants to throw the ball around 100 times. He's somewhat balanced. You're always going to have a quarterback, especially being out there. You look at the way he's recruited California. I just think Lincoln Riley had a binary choice. Do I want to go into the Death Star and fight Darth Vader, or do I want to hang out with the rebellion and try and become Luke Skywalker? And you know what? For that amount of money, good for him. I'm excited to see where it goes. And to me, like Colin, I'm from the South, SEC, all that stuff's great, but I'm also a college football purist. I want USC to be good. I want UCLA to be good. I want Michigan to beat Ohio State every once in a while. So to me, it's making the sport better, because I think a guy can go into Oklahoma, whether it's Brent Venables, whether it's Mark Stoops, go down the list, it doesn't matter, and have success. But a good USC is good for college football. They're one of the 3 to 4 schools past Colorado where I can say that, where it matters, where it makes college football better. I'll just go back to the binary choice. I think it's an easier, and the 12-team playoff had a huge impact in this to me. For him to make this move, he had to have somebody tell him they're going to vote this thing through pretty soon, believe it or not, to the 12-team playoff. I said the same thing about Lane Kiffin in a different vein, Colin. If that Miami job opens up, I think Lane Kiffin would take it, because it's a whole hell of a lot easier to get into the 12 and compete in the ACC than it is trying to be the 4th or 5th team in the SEC and sneak in there.
No, listen, I've said this. Lane fits Miami. He's got ego. He's got edge. So does Miami. And now they don't pay the staff as much, operations, facilities. But, I said this, I loved Michigan beating Ohio State, because when USC played Texas in the national championship, it got a 22.5 rating. That's insane. That's an NFL playoff rating. And now it gets a 15. Why? Because a big chunk of the country feels, we can't compete. And college football's never been able to get New York, Philadelphia, Boston to watch. Chicago watches, Atlanta watches, Dallas watches, and LA used to watch. You get LA back into it, that they watch college football. I can tell you, working at Fox, they're overjoyed because they want to put USC on TV. They want Michigan. They want the Big Ten to matter, because the Chicago viewing audience, when the Big Ten's viable, that you can charge more for ad dollars. So, I'm like you. I love what it does.